Welcome, listeners, to the InFAWmation Nation, brought to you by the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, Division of Fish and Wildlife, Hunter Education Program. We are here today with Dana Kopek, my production assistant, and of course, I'm Scott Travers, the Hunter Education Coordinator for the state of Rhode Island. We're coming to you from the Outdoor Education Office in Exeter, Rhode Island, and as always, our focus is on hunting and hunter education, fishing and aquatic education, and all things wildlife outreach related in the state of Rhode Island. In this episode, we're going to be talking with Tori, whose last name I still can't pronounce, who is a Ph.D. student in the Natural Resources Science Department at the University of Rhode Island. We'll be talking about Tori's graduate research, which is focused on different human and environmental factors that influence the movements of waterfowl here in Rhode Island and as they migrate across the country and continent throughout the year, as well as the implication of those relationships on management and conservation. So welcome, Tori.
Hello.
And can you, again, please give us that correct pronunciation of your last name?
Last name is Mezebish. Make a wish, Mezebish.
Excellent. Fantastic. Right. I love that. And where did you get that from?
My grandmother, she was a school teacher, so she had methods for everything.
Oh, that's awesome. Fantastic. Cool. So tell us, where are you from originally?
So I'm originally from Maryland, born and raised about 45 minutes northwest of Baltimore. I did my undergrad at the University of Maryland. I was pre-vet, thought one day I'd end up in vet school, always loved animals, but then took a turn, ended up doing my master's, studying ringneck ducks down at the University of Georgia, so lived down in Georgia for 2 years, and then came up here to Rhode Island, beautiful Rhode Island, to do my Ph.D.
Excellent. Cool. So it was your work with those ducks then, I guess, that changed a lot of things for you.
Yeah, exactly. So in undergrad, I was lucky enough to get an unpaid internship turned into paid contractor position at Patuxent Wildlife Research Center, which is in Laurel, Maryland. It was about 20 minutes from campus. So spent a couple years there working with a ton of really awesome researchers on a huge diversity of projects. They have a captive sea duck colony there at Patuxent, so there's a lot of husbandry work, in addition to helping out with lots of behaviorally based research projects. During the summer times, one of the biggest projects was breeding and helping to rear ducklings to maintain the captive breeding population. There's some trading with other research colonies. So I think probably the thing that got me hooked most into the world of waterfowl research was designated duckling snuggle time. Like I mentioned, a lot of those projects were behaviorally based, so the birds there had to be comfortable and familiar with humans. So the interns were designated duckling snugglers. So
Fantastic. Cool. So they get to know you.
Exactly.
So can you describe for me a little bit like what a captive population is? It's not, I assume, a wild population, but not a domesticated population either.
Right. So that captive population had probably anywhere between 150, 250 birds at various times. That research facility is federally funded. So a captive sea duck colony is comprised of, for Patuxent, it was anywhere between 150 to 250 birds probably at any one time. They had a huge suite of really awesome species, things like common eider, lesser scaup. There were black ducks at points, harlequin ducks, longtails. They were my favorite. And so that colony is maintained for the purpose of doing research projects that you just can't do on wild birds. Things where, you try to do observational studies of a wild bird, but then they just take off and fly however many miles away, and you just can't get at the answers that you need. So a lot of that research was done to answer questions that you can't with wild populations, but then to apply that information to wild birds.
Gotcha. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Good deal. So can you tell us, why is it important to study waterfowl?
Yeah, so because so many waterfowl are migrant, they cross state and country and continental lines, they're really a shared resource, again, between states, between countries. So managing birds or waterfowl doesn't really just fall at the level of an individual state. We have to work together with other countries even to kind of manage and maintain this shared resource. So on one level, understanding the ecology of waterfowl is important to inform that collaborative management. But waterfowl are also really indicative of how the environment and wetlands and the bay are doing on a whole. You know, if Narragansett Bay is in trouble, if there are poor resources, waterfowl here aren't going to be able to eat or roost where they need to. So they're going to be unhealthy. They won't have as high production, and their populations will suffer. So understanding waterfowl population dynamics, their ecology, is really informative of how the environment is kind of doing on a whole.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about what sea ducks eat and where they roost. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so sea ducks are potentially my favorite kind of suite of ducks. I go back and forth, but I think their ecology is so interesting. So depending on the sea duck itself, they kind of forage in more shallow areas of, let's just focus on Narragansett Bay. So more shallow areas of Narragansett Bay where they can dive down, forage for things like mollusks, aquatic invertebrates. Some species do specialize in submerged aquatic vegetation. So they forage in slightly more shallow areas where they can get down and eat. And then a lot of those species do go further offshore to roost, where there are, fewer predators, maybe less disturbance, those types of factors that would bother them while they're trying to snooze.
Right. So we talked about sea ducks, clearly your favorite. So what are the other types of ducks that are out there?
Yeah, so probably what a lot of people are familiar with are dabbling ducks. Those are things like your mallards, American black ducks. A lot of people call them puddle ducks because you see them in shallow ponds. They do your more typical tipping over and sticking their butts up in the air just to kind of forage on vegetation and bugs and things that are a little closer to the surface.
Right, gotcha. Okay, so you've got sea ducks and dabbling ducks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. And I'd imagine that the migration routes and the places they travel would be different.
Right, yeah. So sea ducks are kind of tied more to the coast, especially throughout the non-breeding season. A lot of the sea ducks, at least here on the East Coast, will be associated with bays and estuaries, and then they tend to breed up in the Arctic. So they go really far north during the summertime. Some sea ducks, like common goldeneye that we have here in Rhode Island, they actually breed in the boreal forests of Canada. They're cavity nesters, so they, similar to wood ducks, nest in tree cavities in the boreal. And then dabbling ducks, I tend to focus on black ducks just because they're what I'm thinking about for my project right now. So we'll take black ducks, for example. They are also associated with kind of coastal marshes during the non-breeding season, so spring, winter, and fall. And then during the breeding season, they're a little bit different than sea ducks. They don't have these designated, strict, big migrations to the Arctic. Some black ducks here in Rhode Island might stick around in Rhode Island. Some might migrate to the boreal forests, like the goldeneyes I was just describing. They won't nest in trees like goldeneyes. They stick to fresh water, sorry. So yeah, there's a really diverse kind of suite of migratory activity that these ducks can show.
That's really cool. So they're really all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I didn't realize they reached such extremes to the north.
Yeah, and hopefully part of my project, part of the fun is seeing where these birds go because, a lot of the migratory data that we have historically on birds is based on banding. So if you're a hunter and the goal is getting a banded bird, it's really awesome to kind of get that history on where the bird was banded. Maybe there were resightings of that band. But more and more so as technology improves, researchers are employing transmitters on birds that get really fine scale more and more so as technology improves. Fine scale data on exactly where birds go throughout their annual cycle and how far north in the breeding season they go, and how far south during the winter they go.
Cool. So, since you mentioned it, when we talk about the bans on birds, if you were a hunter and you harvested a duck and you find that the duck has a band on it, what should you do at that point?
Yeah, so on those bands, there's a phone number and a website for Fish and Wildlife Service where you can go to report that band. I have never gotten one myself, so I haven't been on the receiving end of the process, but I believe they send you information on where that bird was banded, and who banded it, and all of that sort of information. So it's really cool for you as a hunter, but it's also very informative for researchers who are asking questions about harvest rates of birds, again, those movement patterns of birds. So you as a hunter can help kind of inform waterfowl population dynamics.
Right. So you're helping out with the greater picture.
Exactly.
Oh, that's really cool. And you talked about the transmitters. So can we talk a little bit about how you get the ducks to put the transmitters on them?
Yeah, exactly. So I, for my project, am studying, we'll start with American black ducks and Atlantic brant. Those are the two study species that I've deployed transmitters on so far. This year, moving forward, we're going to wrap in common goldeneye. But for black ducks and brant, our kind of capture technique is based on the ecology of the birds. So brant like to come up and forage on big, nice upland lawns. And black ducks like to come up and feed on marshes associated with the salt ponds and things like that. So we use rocket netting to catch brant and black ducks. Essentially, we take these huge, massive nets. They're somewhere between 40 and 60 feet, and literally attach rockets to these nets. So we pull the net up, kind of make it as small and unaggressive to the ducks as possible, and bait in the birds. So for brant, we attract them using decoys and calls, just as if you were out there hunting brant. And for black ducks, we wait until the hunting season is over, of course, and then we start baiting sites with corn. And we watch for a week or two until the ducks are really set on coming in and gobbling up that corn. And once we've got the birds attracted to as small an area as possible, we sit from a safe distance in a truck and push a button that's hooked to a wire, hooked to the rockets, and just launch the net over top of them. And then sprint as fast as we can to start pulling birds out of the net.
Wow, that's quite a process.
Yeah, it's.
So how is it? What's your success rate? Do you get 90% of the birds or 50% of the birds?
So last winter was actually my first time really doing a lot of this rocket netting, and it was definitely a learning curve. There were, I'd say, probably out of at least 15 times we went out there to try and catch brant. We had 3 successful shots.
Wow.
So a lot of mornings waking up at 2:30, setting up in the pitch black and sitting there freezing our butts off, and then watching the birds land 2 feet from where we needed them to be. So.
Oh man, yeah, wow. I think every hunter can understand that, though. Yeah.
Oh yeah, lots of fun.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, so a lot of work goes into this.
Oh yeah, and so my project is in collaboration with Department of Environmental Management, Fish and Wildlife. I work really closely with the state waterfowl biologist, Jennifer Kilburn, and her seasonal technicians. They taught me everything I needed to know about baiting and setting up rocket nets. They really carried us through last winter. So yeah, it's a ton of effort. From mid-January through mid-March, we were sleeping very little.
Right, yeah, boy. Good thing you've got plenty of energy to dedicate to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, wow, no kidding. So what are the major objectives of the research that you're doing?
Right, so here in Rhode Island, and in Narragansett Bay, like I said, it's a really important site in the winter for tons of waterfowl, for your sea ducks, your dabbling ducks, for geese, for a whole suite of waterfowl. But there's also a lot going on in Narragansett Bay associated with humans. So there are a lot of densely populated urban centers. There are associated ports, so lots of cargo shipping activity. You have recreational boating and kayaking, commercial and recreational fishing and shellfishing, waterfowl hunting during the winter. And then the sort of major focus and question for my project is associated with shellfish aquaculture development. So since the mid 1990s, aquaculture has kind of really been on the rise here in Rhode Island. So in, I think, 1996, there were somewhere around 6 shellfish farms here in Rhode Island. But in 2019, that number was up to 81 farms. So there's been a lot of development in aquaculture. It's primarily oyster farms here in the salt ponds and in Narragansett Bay. And the state has a system in place to kind of make informed decisions about, where would be a good spot to lease out an area of a pond to shellfish aquaculture, where might not be such a great system. And, the state votes on that process, and then the area is leased. But one of the things that we just don't have that much information on yet is, do waterfowl interact with aquaculture? Are those interactions positive for the birds? There have been studies in other areas where water birds are attracted to aquaculture because vegetation or mollusks grow on the cages associated with shellfish farming, and that's something for the birds to eat. There have been other studies where birds are displaced by the human activity associated with actually farming oysters. So those kind of questions are just big and open here in Narragansett Bay. So sort of the major focus of this project is asking, do waterfowl interact with aquaculture? Is it positive? Negative, and hopefully inform relative to other environmental and human factors, where may good or bad places be for continuing to expand aquaculture.
Gotcha. And so I take it there's never been a study like this done before.
Not here in Rhode Island. One study is coming to mind that looked at, I think it was black scoters out in British Columbia. So there have been a handful or two of studies looking at bird interactions with aquaculture, but yeah, not here in Narragansett Bay. And yeah.
Well, that's great. So how long is the study going to be open for?
Yeah, so my part of the study, so again, I'm deploying transmitters on waterfowl to kind of look at their movements relative to aquaculture, among many other environmental factors. So last winter, I said we deployed transmitters on brant and black ducks. Those transmitters are solar powered, which is really awesome. Transmitters will last us a couple of years. Our birds are up in the Arctic right now, or the boreal forest, so counting on them to come back in the fall. And I'll have some more information on the duration of transmitter lifespan then. And then next winter, we're deploying transmitters on common goldeneye. So those transmitters are a little bit different because goldeneye are diving birds. We can't strap something on the outside of that bird. Those external transmitters would just reduce the ability of the birds to forage, just add too much buoyancy and drag. So we have to use transmitters that are implanted into the bird's abdominal cavities. It sounds invasive, but veterinarians and researchers have developed a really minimally invasive surgical procedure. It lasts about 30 minutes. And birds wake up within a couple hours and are released and go on their merry way. There have been really high success rates with that procedure in the past. But nonetheless, these internal transmitters, because they don't have a solar recharge, we're going to try and push our luck and get about a year worth of data out of those GoldenEye transmitters. So, long story short, we should get at least, hopefully, 2 years of data out of those external transmitters on Atlantic brant and black ducks, and about a year of data out of the common goldeneye.
Gotcha. Okay, and then I imagine there's going to be time involved to analyze all that data.
Exactly. Yeah, so I'm really lucky in that I kind of get some of this data in real time. So I've already started working through the data that we got from our brant and black ducks last winter. These transmitters send data to me by connecting to the cellular network. So it's kind of almost like we're strapping tiny cell phones to these birds. But one of the downsides of that is that when these birds make it up north into the Arctic where there are no cell towers, they kind of go quiet for the summer.
Gotcha.
So I've kind of got up until mid-May worth of data, and then those birds just got too far north that I stopped hearing from them. So hopefully around mid-September, birds will start to make their way back south, and I'll get that pile of data from the summertime to start working through as well.
That's really cool. And this is the second season you're into the project.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So you can already predict that September is about the time.
Yeah, just about. They probably won't make it all the way down here to Narragansett Bay until mid-October maybe, but I'm hoping that by mid-September they'll start getting within cell tower range.
Yeah, they'll start showing up.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, that's really cool. So how is the research funded?
So, like I said, this project is a partnership between the University of Rhode Island and Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, Fish and Wildlife. So a lot of the money for this project comes from DEM and from the federal government and from Fish and Wildlife Service, from things like people buying hunting licenses. Hunting licenses and duck stamps. So a big consortium of resources come together to fund this type of research.
Gotcha. So Pittman Robertson, I assume,
Yes.
also is involved with that.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Yeah, excellent. So what are some of the really interesting things that you found out so far from the study?
So to me, I'm really interested in these kind of large-scale annual cycle movements of our birds. A lot of the finer scale winter type questions will come out as I start parsing through that data, but it's just so cool to see where these birds go throughout the whole year. So for our black ducks, we actually had two females stay here in Rhode Island throughout the entire summer. All of the remainder of the birds took off on migrations. We had some that I maintained data hearing from throughout the entire summer. They ended up in Maine. Others presumably went further north. I haven't heard from them in a couple months, but yeah, two females stayed down here. One female actually made a nesting attempt on Sandy Point Island, right outside of Little Narragansett Bay. And it was so awesome to, kind of see her movements really hone in on one area. And then with one of my lab mates, we kayaked out to Sandy Point Island, and by that point, she had a little tussle with all the gulls that are nesting out there on Sandy Point Island as well. So they beat her out on her nest attempt. But yeah, it's really just so incredible to me to be able to see with these transmitters where these birds go and kind of throughout the year what might be influencing why they're doing what they're doing.
Right, gotcha. Now, do you think there's any chance that you'll be able to track them better once they make their summer journey to the Arctic? Is there any way that we could possibly, get more data from that part of the trip?
I hope so. Hopefully one day technology will get us there so that there's never this kind of dark period. But
Right.
But yeah, fingers crossed that, the birds survive through the summer, the transmitters last through the summer, that when they do start making their way back down south, I should theoretically, knock on wood, get all that data piled back in.
Gotcha. Yeah, I always find that very, really incredible myself, just the fact that they travel such tremendous distances and then make it back here.
Yeah.
That's really incredible.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it really is, yeah. So what can our listeners do to find out more about your projects and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so you can go ahead and follow Rhode Island DEM's Division of Fish and Wildlife Outdoor Education on social media. They're regularly posting updates about all of the cool projects that they're involved in. Some of my fellow grad students are doing really cool research with other species native to Rhode Island. So that's a great way to stay up to date on what the state is up to.
Gotcha. So on your project, as well as just waterfowl in general.
Right, exactly.
Okay, really cool. Good deal. So how can our listeners reach out to you if they have any questions directly related to your survey or the project that you're working on? Is there a way they can reach out to you?
Yeah, for sure. Listeners can email me anytime. My email address is tmezebish. That's TMEZEBISH @uri.edu.
Gotcha. Okay, so Mezebish, common spelling then.
Common spelling.
Gotcha. All right. So one thing we always ask of our guests is for one funny or memorable story from the field. So do you have some funny story to tell us today?
At the time, everything was just very cold and sad. We just had to laugh. One time we were trying to catch brant up at Latham Park in Barrington. And like I mentioned earlier, it was a lot of just sitting around watching birds land 3 feet where you wanted them, 3 feet from where you wanted them to be. So there was a jetty across the water that we kind of saw some birds heading to, and we wanted them to head in the opposite direction. So I had an incredible volunteer come out and help us, and I called her up and I said, hey, can you please just drive over to that jetty and, I don't know, yell or wave your arms or something. Don't let the birds come over there. And she was so incredible. We were on the phone while she was over there, and we're sitting in the truck, you know, with our hand ready to go on the rocket net and watching her wave her arms around with her phone in her hand because we've just been talking. And we just see, as she does one big wave, her phone fall out of her hand and down into the jetty. And we just sat there like, oh no. And she was so incredible though. Instead of like immediately going to look for her phone down in this rock crevice, she's still standing there screaming, yelling at the birds, trying to get them to head the other direction. So we really relied a lot on incredible volunteers and technicians with energy and positive attitudes to get us through the field season.
Yeah, no doubt. Where I totally stay right on task.
100%.
Holy cow. Wow, that's amazing. Boy. Yeah, and I bet there's a lot of stories using that rocket net that you can tell too.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, goodness. Wow. Boy, well, you know, hopefully someday technology will catch up with that rocket net. We'll make that a little better too.
Yeah, hopefully.
Oh, goodness. That's so funny. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for coming to us and joining us on our podcast. Do you have any other final comments or anything that you would like to mention to our listeners?
I think I'm all good. Thanks so much for having me. Get out this winter and go check out some waterfowl. There are some really awesome spots here in Rhode Island to see my favorite sea ducks. Out on Jamestown, I love going to Beavertail and Fort Wetherill State Park to see things like harlequin ducks and eiders. So get outside this winter. Brave the cold.
That's right. Fantastic. You can always put a layer on. You can always stay socially distanced, and you can go out and enjoy nature.
Exactly.
Fantastic. That's excellent. Well, again, thank you for coming and joining us on the podcast. Stay tuned, listeners, for next month when we're going to be having Will Walker, the head of the Forestry Division in Rhode Island, who's going to talk to us about forest health in Rhode Island on both public and private lands, as well as different programs available for landowners in the state of Rhode Island that may already be funded, either through state or federal funding, to help you improve your land. And we'll also cover different programs that the state of Rhode Island and the federal government have for landowners in the state of Rhode Island that can possibly help you make your land a better habitat for wildlife in the state of Rhode Island, for both game and non-game species. So again, this is Scott Travers coming to you from the Outdoor Education Office in the state of Rhode Island. We'll be back again next month. And in the meantime, as Tori told us, let's please go outside when we can, take a break from our busy lives, and enjoy the natural resources from the state of Rhode Island.